Medieval warfare wasn't just about swinging swords or riding into battle with shiny armor. It was about survival, timing, and knowing when to strike. In a world shaped by conflict, a few warriors stood above the rest, not just as fighters, but as leaders who knew how to win when it mattered most. These 5 men didn't fight for glory alone. They built reputations through strategy, grit, and sheer force of will. Some came from royalty, others from nothing, but all of them changed the game. We're ranking them not by titles or myths, but by the real impact they had on war and history. Number 1, Edward the Black Prince. Edward of Woodstock, better known to history as the Black Prince, wasn't the kind of royal who lived behind palace walls or relied on his title to gain respect. From the moment he stepped onto the battlefield, it became clear that he wasn't interested in merely symbolizing leadership. He embodied it. Born in 1330 as the eldest son of King Edward III of England, Edward had all the advantages of wealth, education, and noble birth. But what separated him from so many others of his rank was his unwavering determination to earn his own legacy in blood, sweat, and strategy. He wasn't content to watch others fight his battles or issue orders from a comfortable distance. Instead, he chose to ride with his troops, fight among them, and lead not from behind but from the front lines, sword in hand. At the shockingly young age of 16, Edward was thrown into one of the most brutal military confrontations of the era, the Battle of Crécy. This wasn't a skirmish or a test run. It was a major clash between English and French forces during the Hundred Years' War. While most teenagers of the time were still learning court etiquette or being groomed for political marriages, Edward was standing in the mud, directing formations and rallying soldiers who were twice his age. And the wildest part, he thrived in it. His performance during that battle wasn't just impressive, it was game-changing. Under his leadership, the English forces utilized the longbow with devastating effect, and Edward proved he wasn't just a figurehead placed at the front for morale. He understood tactics, terrain, and timing. His decisions contributed directly to one of the most significant English victories in the war. But his reputation wasn't built on one moment. Years later, at the Battle of Poitiers, he cemented his name in history again. This time, not just through skill, but through boldness. Facing a larger and heavily armored French army, Edward didn't back down. Instead, he used clever terrain positioning and feigned retreats to draw the enemy in, only to surround and smash them in close combat. The climax of the battle came when he captured King John II of France himself. It was a staggering moment. Not only did it demoralize the French, but it handed the English one of the most valuable bargaining chips in medieval diplomacy. The ransom paid for the king's release was astronomical. That money poured into England's coffers and changed the economic landscape practically overnight. And yet, for all his battlefield victories, Edward wasn't just some bloodthirsty warlord. He genuinely believed in the code of chivalry, loyalty, honor, respect for worthy opponents. But he also knew when idealism had to make room for pragmatism. He showed mercy when it made sense, and he crushed resistance when it didn't. He treated captured nobles with the kind of grace expected of a prince, but he made sure no one ever mistook mercy for weakness. His enemies didn't just lose to him, they feared him. Not because of cruelty, but because of precision, discipline, and the aura of invincibility he carried into every fight. And that's what earned him the name the Black Prince. While the origin of the nickname is still debated, whether it referred to the color of his armor or the dark legend he became in France, one thing is certain: it stuck because it felt right. Despite being the heir to the English throne, Edward never became king. Illness and the constant wear of battle slowly wore him down. He died in 1376, just 1 year before his father. But even in death, his legacy overshadowed many kings who ruled for decades. His military mind, his charisma on the field, and his refusal to coast on privilege turned him into something larger than life. Soldiers who served under him spoke of his presence with awe, and even his political opponents acknowledged the power he carried. The memory of the Black Prince outlived him by centuries. not just as a military icon, but as a symbol of what it meant to lead with both courage and clarity. In a world where titles meant everything, Edward proved that real respect had to be earned, one battle at a time. Number 2, Godfrey of Bouillon. Godfrey of Bouillon wasn't a man who chased glory just for the sake of vanity or power. He came from nobility, born into wealth and privilege as the Duke of Lower Lorraine, a title that gave him both military command and political influence in medieval Europe. But what made Godfrey different, what pushed him into the annals of history, was his decision to leave behind comfort, certainty, and rank in pursuit of something far greater than himself. He didn't join the First Crusade out of desperation or greed. This was a man who already had land, wealth, and recognition. Yet he chose to step into a brutal, uncertain campaign that would test the limits of every person involved, all because he believed in a cause larger than his own life. When Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade, asking Christians to take up arms and march to the Holy Land, it sparked a wave of ambition, confusion, and hope across Europe. Some saw it as a divine mission, others as a path to fortune. But for Godfrey, it was about conviction. He sold off a significant portion of his estates to fund his army, not because he had to, but because he wanted to lead men under his own banner, not borrow someone else's favor. That move alone separated him from many other lords who were happy to ride along with someone else's wealth. Godfrey wasn't looking to attach himself to a movement. He wanted to shape it. The journey east was anything but glamorous. Godfrey and his army faced unimaginable obstacles even before reaching their destination. They trudged across miles of unforgiving terrain, dealing with harsh climates, food shortages, disease, and hostile encounters that bled them dry long before they reached the Holy Land. What kept them going wasn't blind loyalty, it was the quiet steadiness of their leader. Godfrey didn't inspire with fiery speeches. He wasn't the type to shout orders from a platform. Instead, he walked beside his men, slept on the same cold ground, and ate the same rations, even as the landscape burned and corpses lined the road. That kind of leadership breeds respect you can't fake. By the time his forces reached Jerusalem, the campaign had become a physical and spiritual trial. The siege of the city was brutal and drawn out. Supplies were low, tempers high, and morale stretched to the edge. But when the time came to strike, Godfrey didn't hesitate. He helped coordinate the final assault and was among the first to breach the city walls during the battle. It wasn't just a symbolic act, it was an expression of who he was. A man who didn't order others to take the first risk. He took it himself. When the city finally fell, there was a power vacuum. The Crusaders had captured Jerusalem, but someone needed to govern it. The obvious choice was Godfrey. His military leadership, calm demeanor, and consistent moral compass made him stand out from a field of commanders who were often too hungry for recognition. But when he was offered the title of king, he turned it down. He refused to wear a golden crown in a city where, in his own words, Christ had worn one of thorns. That decision spoke louder than any sword or speech. It showed humility, a deep sense of responsibility, and the kind of character rarely seen in leaders who hold real power. Instead, he took the title Defender of the Holy Sepulchre, a role that reflected his dedication not to domination, but to protection. And the challenges didn't end with the capture of the city. Godfrey now had to defend it from outside forces eager to reclaim it, and internal tensions that constantly threatened to unravel the fragile unity of the Crusaders. The truth was, the crusade didn't magically end with victory. The real work started after, and Godfrey was one of the few who didn't just know how to fight, but knew how to hold things together when the smoke cleared. His leadership kept Jerusalem in Christian hands during that critical first year. He negotiated, resisted attacks, and maintained a sense of order in a region that had known nothing but war for generations. He didn't reign long. His life was cut short just a year after the city was taken. But what he accomplished in that time left a mark. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, but when everything was on the line and no one else could be trusted to put others first, Godfrey was the one who stepped forward. Not for riches, not for titles, but because someone had to. And that kind of quiet strength is what makes a true champion. Number 3, Robert the Bruce. Robert the Bruce wasn't born into peace or certainty. His path was tangled in political chaos, shifting loyalties, and a kingdom constantly caught between resistance and submission. He lived during a time when Scotland was torn apart by conflict, not just against the English crown, but also within its own noble class. Despite being of noble blood, Robert's claim to leadership wasn't universally welcomed, and even among his own people, trust was a fragile thing. He had rivals, enemies, and even former allies who turned against him when the pressure mounted. Yet, what defined Robert the Bruce was not how easily he won battles. It was how relentlessly he came back after defeat. Early in his journey, he wasn't seen as a destined king or military genius. He struggled with wavering alliances and internal conflicts that nearly destroyed him before his real campaign even began. One of the darkest moments in his early reign came after the murder of John Comyn, a fellow noble and political rival, which sparked a deep crisis of legitimacy. Following that, Bruce was excommunicated by the church, hunted by the English, and forced to flee with only a handful of loyal supporters. His wife was imprisoned, his brothers were executed, and his lands were seized. Everything he'd fought for looked like it had collapsed before it truly began, but Robert wasn't the kind of leader who disappeared when the odds turned. He vanished into the harsh Scottish landscape, not to hide, but to regroup. He started small, striking where he could, gathering support slowly, avoiding direct confrontations with larger English forces. He understood something many others didn't. Survival could be a weapon. His tactics shifted from traditional warfare to a more agile, flexible form of fighting. He used the geography of Scotland to his advantage, turning forests, bogs, and mountains into allies. English forces, trained for set-piece battles on flat ground, were suddenly chasing shadows. Bruce's men would strike fast, disappear, and leave behind chaos. Supplies were ambushed, garrisons raided, morale chipped away piece by piece. This wasn't just about war, it was psychological. Every success, no matter how small, sent a message. Robert the Bruce was still here, still fighting, still refusing to vanish. Over time, that message spread. Support began to grow, not just among common folk tired of foreign control, but also among nobles who once doubted him. They saw that Robert wasn't chasing empty glory. He was fighting for something real. And when the tide finally began to turn, he didn't get reckless. He remained calculated, focused, and determined to make every move count. Then came the moment that turned him from rebel to legend, the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. Facing a vastly larger English army led by King Edward II himself, Bruce's forces were outnumbered and out-equipped. But what the English brought in size, Robert countered with planning. He chose the battlefield carefully, using narrow terrain and marshy ground to disrupt cavalry movements. His troops were disciplined, motivated, and fully aware of what was at stake. Over 2 brutal days, the Scottish forces stood their ground, and against all expectations, they broke the English lines. Bannockburn wasn't just a victory, it was a message carved into history. Scotland would not be broken, and Robert the Bruce had earned his crown not through bloodline alone, but through fire, loss, and pure, stubborn resolve. But victory didn't make him complacent. After the battle, Bruce didn't descend into vengeance. He focused on stabilizing his kingdom, securing recognition of Scotland's independence, and trying to heal the fractures within his nation. He knew that real victory wasn't just on the battlefield, it was in how you built after the dust settled. His reign wasn't perfect, and he made mistakes, but he proved that leadership isn't about always winning. It's about knowing how to keep going, how to change, and how to lead people even when everything seems lost. Robert the Bruce turned from a hunted fugitive into a warrior king who reshaped the destiny of his country with brains, bravery, and unshakable determination. Number 4, Harold Hardrada, There are few figures in medieval history whose life story feels so vividly cinematic as that of Harold Hardrada. Born into the rough, storm-forged lands of Norway around the early 11th century, Harold's journey from a wounded teenager on the battlefield to one of the most formidable warrior kings of the era reads like a legend etched in blood and iron. His story didn't begin in a throne room or a place of quiet privilege. It began with chaos, in the thick of civil war, where Harold fought alongside his half-brother, the famous King Olaf II, only to see their army crushed and his brother fall in battle. Injured and forced into exile while still in his teens, most men would have faded into obscurity. But Harold was cut from a different cloth. Instead of vanishing, he turned his exile into an odyssey. He traveled across the continent, eventually arriving in the glittering and dangerous city of Constantinople, where he joined the Varangian Guard, the elite personal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperors. These men were not ordinary soldiers. They were hand-picked warriors known for their loyalty and sheer ferocity in combat. Harold didn't just serve with them, he rose to command them. That in itself was no small feat. It meant he earned respect not through politics or birthright, but through battlefield brilliance, fearlessness, and sheer tactical sharpness. With the Varangians, Harold fought in a whirlwind of campaigns that took him across the Mediterranean world. From the deserts of the Middle East to the cities of North Africa and the rugged lands of Asia Minor, he picked up more than just scars. He absorbed different ways of thinking, new methods of warfare, and a wider understanding of power, supply chains, and military discipline. These weren't lessons you learned in royal courts. These were learned by watching men die around you and understanding what made armies break or hold. By the time he returned to Norway, he wasn't just a warrior anymore. He was a war machine, sharpened by years of blood-soaked experience. He didn't crawl back looking for a quiet life or a role in someone else's government. He came back with the ambition to rule, and he fought for it. Claiming the throne wasn't just about politics, it was a military operation. Harold built alliances, crushed opposition, and forged his authority through strength. But what's more impressive is what came after. He didn't settle into the role of a content king. He kept pushing. Harold launched a campaign of expansion and consolidation that would have broken lesser rulers. He improved the administrative side of the kingdom while still leading military expeditions personally. He used siege engines with precision, planned logistics with a level of detail many of his contemporaries overlooked, and made sure his forces were always ready to strike fast and hard. His mind was a perfect mix of calculation and audacity. He never relied on brute strength alone. He knew when to negotiate, when to intimidate, and when to obliterate. Then, true to his nature, he aimed higher. He set his eyes on the English throne, believing he had a legitimate claim through past dynastic promises and political arrangements. But Harold wasn't the type to simply make demands and wait for an answer. In 1066, he launched an invasion of England, sweeping in with thousands of warriors, striking hard and capturing key positions in the north. For a moment, it looked like he was unstoppable, but fate caught up with him at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Though he fought with legendary bravery, leading from the front as always, Harold was killed in the chaos of the fight, ending his campaign and his life. Yet, his death didn't mark failure. It marked the close of a chapter, the end of the Viking Age. His invasion came just days before William of Normandy launched his own assault, forever changing England's destiny. But Harold's mark had already been made. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a symbol of the last great Viking spirit, refined through the years of international warfare, unrelenting ambition, and an unwillingness to ever stand still. He took the traditions of his forebears and carried them farther than most ever imagined possible. Harold Hardrada didn't just live through history, he shaped it with fire and steel. Number 5, John Hawkwood. In an age where banners and bloodlines defined who led armies, John Hawkwood was an exception to the rule. A man who carved his path not through noble birth or inherited titles, but through the sharp edge of his sword and the even sharper edge of his mind. He wasn't raised in a castle or surrounded by royal advisors. He came from modest English roots, and what he lacked in pedigree, he more than made up for in grit, adaptability, and raw battlefield instinct. Hawkwood didn't rise through the ranks by accident. Every promotion, every victory, and every alliance was earned, measured, and carefully maneuvered. This was not a man led by blind loyalty or abstract ideals. He was guided by clarity, ambition, and a highly disciplined sense of purpose. When conflicts in England started to cool, Hawkwood didn't wait around for the next opportunity to fall into his lap. He looked beyond the horizon and crossed into Italy, a fragmented region where city-states were constantly at each other's throats, and loyalties shifted with the wind. It was a place teeming with opportunity for someone who knew how to navigate chaos, and Hawkwood thrived in it. He formed his own elite fighting unit known as the White Company, a name that would soon strike fear into the hearts of nobles and commanders across the region. This wasn't some ragtag band of thugs, it was a disciplined, professional army that functioned with a level of efficiency that most national forces couldn't match. What made the White Company so effective was not just its strength, but its precision. Hawkwood trained his men to move fast, strike hard, and disappear before retaliation could form. He understood that the best victories were sometimes the ones you didn't have to fight for. He used threats, sieges, and strategic positioning to force cities into submission without ever raising a blade. His tactics were psychological as much as they were physical. If a town resisted, he could choke off its trade, intimidate its allies, or simply park his army at the gates until hunger and fear did the work for him. And when a settlement did surrender, he enforced discipline. Looting was kept under control, civilians were spared, and order was maintained. This made him a rare figure in a brutal time, a mercenary leader who didn't let chaos devour everything in his path. But Hawkwood wasn't just a master of battlefield maneuvers. He was also a shrewd political operator. He navigated the constantly shifting alliances of Renaissance Italy with the poise of a seasoned diplomat. He made deals with popes, dukes, and city rulers, sometimes working for them, sometimes against them, but always ensuring that his men were paid and that his name remained valuable. He understood leverage. He would switch sides if necessary, not out of betrayal, but out of tactical calculation. He didn't fight for flags or honor. He fought for survival and success, and in doing so, became one of the most respected military figures of his time. And it wasn't just fear that made people respect Hawkwood, it was reliability. If he agreed to defend a city, it held. If he promised peace, it was delivered. That rare consistency made him invaluable in a world where alliances crumbled overnight. Unlike many warlords of his era who burned bright and faded fast, Hawkwood managed to build a lasting reputation without dying in disgrace or being consumed by his own ambition. He knew when to push and when to pause, when to fight and when to negotiate, when to move, and when to stand still. In the end, he didn't die on a battlefield or fall to treachery. He died wealthy, honored, and with a legacy intact, something few mercenaries could claim. His funeral was treated with respect, and even those who once called him an enemy had to admit they'd witnessed something rare. John Hawkwood didn't just survive in a cutthroat world, he mastered it. And he did it not by brute strength alone, but by turning the uncertainties of war into tools for control. In a time when loyalty meant little and everything was for sale, he proved that power could be crafted from discipline, strategy, and a refusal to ever let the battlefield define your destiny.